Welcome to Hip Hop Flash. No filters, no fear, just hip hop. Let's get into it.
Lupe Fiasco just spent the last 2 weeks throwing gasoline on his own legacy trying to prove a point about Kendrick Lamar. And today, the president of Top Dog Entertainment personally picked up the phone and quietly ended the whole thing before it ended Lupe. Terrence Punch Henderson didn't tweet a subliminal, didn't send a proxy, didn't hop on a live stream to make a scene. He called the man directly and posted the receipts himself. And now the same fans who've been screaming that Lupe Fiasco is jealous of Kendrick are staring at a statement that says, "It's all love. Everyone relax. Respect the art form." But here's the part nobody wants to sit with, and this is where the whole story flips on its head. Punch is the exact same man who said back in 2010 that Lupe was doing too many fairy tale raps, the exact same clip that resurfaced this week, and somehow the internet decided to weaponize a 15-year-old opinion from a label executive against a rapper who has sold more than 20 million records. Something is deeply broken in how this generation of hip-hop fans is being taught to argue, and this Lupe situation is the clearest proof yet. By the time we get to what Punch actually said in that 2010 stream and what it exposes about the Kendrick stan machine that's forming right now, you're going to understand why this beef was never really about Lupe at all. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. So let's set the table properly, because half the people yelling online right now don't even know what actually happened. Over the last couple of weeks, Lupe Fiasco has been doing what Lupe Fiasco has always done, sitting down for long-form interviews and talking his talk. He went on Culture United, he went on Koality, he's been popping up on podcasts, and in those conversations he made a few statements that sent the internet into a full meltdown. He said, in his opinion, that he's a better lyricist than Kendrick Lamar. He said there are potentially 100 rappers without record deals that he considers better lyricists than Kendrick. He clarified more than once that he's actually a Kendrick fan, that he respects his creativity and his conceptualization, and that he's specifically talking about the narrow lane of pure lyricism, not hit records, not albums, not cultural impact. But of course, none of that nuance survived the internet blender. The clips got chopped, the headlines got sharpened, and within 48 hours, Lupe Fiasco was being framed as bitter, jealous, washed, and desperate for a check that isn't coming. Then Punch, the head of TDE, drops a statement saying he and Lupe just had a private phone conversation, that they spoke about everything from the Monster Freestyle in 2010 to the 2010 live stream to the recent podcast run, and that there's no smoke, no beef, and no static. On paper, that should end it. It doesn't, because the real story isn't whether Lupe and Kendrick are cool. They were always cool. The real story is what this entire cycle just revealed about the Kendrick fan base, about how modern rap debates are manufactured, and about why the most decorated lyricist of his generation now has to defend himself for having an opinion that used to be common sense in every barbershop, every mixtape blog, and every hip-hop forum from 2006 to about 2015. So the question we actually have to answer today is this: how did we get to a place where saying Lupe Fiasco is one of the greatest lyricists alive became a controversial statement? Let's go straight to the surface evidence, because it's a lot more damning than the headlines suggest. Piece number 1, the Koality interview. If you watch how that segment actually started, and this is important, Koala was reacting to a video from the homie King Green about lyricism not selling records, and Koala essentially pointed at Lupe as his example of a lyricist who doesn't move units. That framing is factually incorrect. Lupe Fiasco has moved north of 20 million records across his catalog. That is a certified, documented, chart-verified number, not a talking point. And when Lupe pushed back on that framing, Koala's rebuttal was that Lupe only did those numbers off like 3 records, which, and I want you to sit with this, is one of the most disrespectful sentences ever aimed at a platinum artist by somebody who has not moved 100,000 of anything. That's not analysis, that's a setup. Piece number 2, the 2010 live stream clip that resurfaced this week. In it, Kendrick Lamar and Punch are talking on camera. The chat brings up Lupe Fiasco after Kendrick praises Eminem's wordplay. And Punch, not Kendrick, Punch, says Lupe fell off and is doing too many fairy tale raps, that it ain't organic and realistic anymore. Kendrick, notably, does not co-sign it. Kendrick is quiet. Punch is the one making the critique, and yet 15 years later that clip is being circulated as if Kendrick himself said it, which is exactly the kind of manufactured evidence that fuels these fake beefs. Piece number 3, the monster freestyle from 2010, the same one Punch referenced in his statement. On that freestyle, Kendrick literally says, quote, "I'm the best rapper alive. Lupe Fiasco and Nas better retire under 30,000. End quote. That is Kendrick Lamar putting Lupe in the same sentence as Nas, on record, on tape, over a decade ago. So when Kendrick fans online this week were saying Kendrick never even acknowledged Lupe on Control, acting like Lupe is a nobody to Kendrick's camp, that is documented, verifiable, receipt-having, video-existing revisionist history. And this right here is the pattern we're going to keep circling back to. The actual archive of hip-hop does not match the story the internet is currently trying to sell you.
And oh, do I have more for you. Because if you thought the Koala T setup was bad, wait until you hear what Punch actually said on that 2010 stream in full context. And wait until you see which prominent Kendrick fans from 2010 are on record calling Lupe one of the greatest writers in rap. The exact same accounts in some cases, now calling him washed. The revisionism is going to make your head spin. Kendrick stans, this next section is not going to feel good, so buckle up. Now we move into the cultural layer, and this is where the receipts get personal. Piece 1, Punch's own statement, word for word, and read it slowly because it's a masterclass in professional diplomacy. Punch wrote that he and Lupe had a great conversation, that it's all love and respect on both ends, that they spoke about context, misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and intentions, and that they covered everything from the monster freestyle to the 2010 live stream, all the way up through the recent podcasts. He ended it with, "No smoke, LOL, just lighthearted, friendly hip-hop conversation. Everyone relax, respect the art form." Now pay attention to what that statement does. It quietly confirms that yes, Lupe was hurt by the fairy tale raps comment. It quietly confirms that yes, that 2010 clip had been sitting there for over a decade. It confirms that Punch felt the need to personally address it, which means he understood, unlike the fans, that Lupe Fiasco is not a nobody you brush off. That's cultural evidence you can't fake. Piece 2. The TDE-Lupe relationship has always been solid. Lupe appeared on Ab Soul's album. Kendrick name-dropped him on the Monster Freestyle. There's mutual respect at the artist level that has existed for over a decade. So the version of this story where Lupe is some outsider hater trying to steal shine from Kendrick's camp is fiction, and Punch's statement basically confirms that in public. Piece 3, and this is the one that's going to sting. The historical Kendrick fanbase does not agree with the current Kendrick fanbase. If you go back to the chat logs of that 2010 live stream, Kendrick's day one fans, the people who were rocking with him before Section 80, were the ones typing Lupe as one of the greatest writers in the chat when the topic came up. These are not casuals. These are not hype beasts who found Kendrick after Not Like Us. These are the real ones. And when Punch dropped the fairy tale raps line, those same fans pushed back in the chat, told Punch he was crazy, defended Lupe's pen. That is documented. Now compare that to the 2025 Kendrick fanbase, where a substantial chunk of them are calling Lupe washed, complicated, boring, and irrelevant, using, and this is the part I need you to hear, the exact same language OVO stans used against Kendrick during the Drake beef. Complicated, too deep, nobody listens to him, doesn't sell. That's the same script, just pointed at a different target. Now, I know somebody is going to argue that fan bases evolve, that new fans come in, that this is natural. Fine, but when the evolution moves in the direction of dismissing one of the most technically gifted rappers of the last 20 years because he had a lukewarm opinion in a podcast, that's not evolution. That's a fan base becoming exactly what it used to hate.
And here's where this stops being about music at all and starts being about the machine that manufactures these arguments in the first place. Because let's be honest about what's actually happening here. This whole cycle was engineered, and I don't mean that in a conspiracy way. I mean that in a straightforward business and media incentive way. Layer 1 of the system, the modern hip-hop debate economy is built on outrage clips. Long-form interviews get sliced into 30-second reels, the most inflammatory sentence gets pulled, and the algorithm rewards the version of the take that's least accurate. Lupe sat down and said in a 15-minute conversation about lyricism that he considers himself a better lyricist than Kendrick in that narrow lane. That thoughtful, qualified opinion gets flattened into Lupe Fiasco says Kendrick is trash. The reels do millions of views. The reaction channels do millions of views. The rebuttal reels do millions of views. Every party in the chain, the clip account, the reaction channel, the rage bait podcaster, eats. The only person who doesn't eat is Lupe, whose actual career and legacy is being used as raw material for other people's monetization. That's not organic discourse, that's an industry. Layer 2 of the system, the modern stan structure is a defensive perimeter, not a fan community. There's a specific breed of fandom that treats any critique of their favorite artist as a personal attack, and it has metastasized inside hip-hop over the last 3 years. This is the same infrastructure that turned Drake fans into a defensive army during the Kendrick beef, and it's the same infrastructure that has now been pointed inward on anyone who so much as raises an eyebrow at Kendrick. It doesn't matter that Kendrick himself, based on everything he's ever publicly said, would probably shake Lupe's hand tomorrow. The stans have decided the war exists. And here's the systemic point. The artist at the center almost never benefits from that kind of fandom in the long run. Ask Drake how helpful the OVO defense army was when the actual music had to speak for itself. Every time an artist becomes the center of a defensive stan army, the music stops being the story, and the fandom becomes the story, and the fandom is always the weaker product. So when I watch this happen to Kendrick, an artist whose entire brand was built on nuance, complexity, and respect for lyricism, I see a fan base actively degrading the thing that made him great in the first place. That's not support. That's slow-motion sabotage dressed up as loyalty. And here is the truth bomb, the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Kendrick Lamar has been strategically silent on every one of these situations for a reason, and that silence is not accidental, it is architectural. Look at the pattern. Big Scene has a decade-long thing with Kendrick. Kendrick says nothing, and somebody else handles it. Drake's situation. Kendrick handles it musically, then disappears into silence. Lupe's situation. Kendrick says nothing, and Punch handles it. Every single time there is smoke around Kendrick, the smoke gets cleared by someone else in his orbit, while Kendrick himself remains untouchable in the public eye. That is not a coincidence. That is a career strategy, and it is one of the most disciplined public relations operations in modern hip-hop. It allows Kendrick to keep the mystique, keep the reverence.
Keep the he only speaks through the music mythology fully intact, while the actual dirty work of maintaining relationships gets outsourced to the label. Now, I want to be clear, that's not a criticism of Kendrick. That's actually brilliant. But it does mean that when fans scream Kendrick doesn't care about Lupe, Lupe is beneath him, they are participating in a narrative that Kendrick himself has never confirmed. Kendrick has never called Lupe washed. Kendrick has never dismissed Lupe. Kendrick on the Monster Freestyle put Lupe in a sentence with Nas. The person who said Lupe was doing fairy tale raps was Punch, and Punch just personally called Lupe to walk it back. So the entire architecture of the Kendrick versus Lupe narrative that the internet has been building for 2 weeks is based on words Kendrick never said, positions Kendrick never took, and disrespect Kendrick never gave. And that, to me, is the biggest reveal of this whole cycle. The beef never existed. The fans manufactured a war and then demanded the veterans of the genre bow to it. And this is where the resolution has to land, because the person who comes out of this looking the strongest is the person who's barely said a word, Kendrick Lamar. Not because he won anything, but because he didn't have to fight. His team handled it. His camp cleaned it up. His name got protected. That's the discipline of an artist who understands that longevity in this game is not about winning every argument. It's about not being in the argument in the first place. Meanwhile, Lupe Fiasco, for all the noise this week, is also going to be fine. This man has sold 20 million records, has a catalog that includes food and liquor in the cool, teaches at MIT, and just had the president of TDE personally call him to squash a 15-year-old comment. That is not the resume of a washed rapper. That is the resume of a legend who is important enough that the biggest label in modern hip-hop has to manage the relationship personally. And the contrast one-liner that crystallizes this entire story is simple. The internet spent 2 weeks trying to convince you Lupe Fiasco was jealous of Kendrick Lamar, and it took one phone call from Kendrick's own label to prove the internet was lying. Everybody with a real ear for this culture already knew that. The barbershop knew that. The mixtape era knew that. The 2010 Kendrick fans in that live stream chat knew that. The only people who didn't know that were the ones who joined the party after Not Like Us and mistook a Super Bowl performance for a full understanding of hip-hop history. Real recognizes real, and Punch made that phone call because real recognized real. Everything else is just noise. But this is only the start, because Lupe has a project on the way, and based on the way this promo run is gone, you already know that album is going to arrive with a chip on his shoulder the size of Chicago. Watch what happens when he actually raps. Watch which bars get quoted. Watch how quickly the same people calling him Wash this week become the same people posting his lyrics with fire emojis in 3 months. And keep your eyes on Kendrick's next move too, because every time Kendrick's camp has to step in and clean something, it usually means the next body of work is going to address it in code. That's how he operates. That's the pattern. If any of that lands the way I think it's going to land, this Lupe Punch phone call is going to look like the appetizer, not the meal. So if you're not subscribed, fix that right now. Hit the bell so YouTube can't hide these videos from you, and keep it locked because we are not done with this story. Next up on the channel, we're breaking down the one bar on the upcoming Lupe project that industry insiders are already whispering could reignite this entire debate. Who it's aimed at, why it matters, and why TDE might not be able to make this next phone call quite as easily. You do not want to miss that one. See you in the next video.